Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Wednesday Album Club. I'm Marty. Nice to see you. We're here with my most awesome co-host, Alan. City Baby Attacked by Goats, and of course, Jim from Eihwaz Recordings has returned. What did we decide, Jim? This was your ninth episode of this already, or
Actually, I
10th?
think this makes 10, man. Yeah, so double
One more and you,
digits.
yeah, one more and you get the coupon for the free ice cream.
Yeah, nice.
Right.
The free burrito.
As long as it's Moomers from Traverse City, Marty.
Yeah. Absolutely. We'll expedite that quickly. But we have gathered here tonight to discuss. Last week I chose the new Destruction album, Diabolical. It's their 7th full-length album. I guess before we get into any information before I dive into history and we get going on this? Is there anything anybody wants to talk about before we go?
I think.
You guys want to touch on Mike leaving and like what that may be all about, you know?
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get going on it, I think. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm just going to jump into it then.
Go for it.
The band was formed in Vale am Rhein, Germany. Back then, they were known as Night of Demon in 1982. The band was inspired by Maiden, Merciful Fate, Motorhead, and Venom. The lineup for Night of Demon was Ulf Kuhne on vocals, Mike Siffringer on guitar, Marcel Schmiermer on bass, and Tommy Sandman on drums. Kuhne was kicked out of the band over a conflict with Schmier over a woman. Schmier assumed the vocal duties after that, and they changed the name to Destruction. They went on, released the Bestial Devastation of Hell demo on August 10th, 1984, which oddly enough is my wedding anniversary. They then signed with Steamhammer and released the Sentence of Death EP on November 10th, 1984. And after that, the rest is history. They've been at it for 38 years. They've got 17 full-length albums, which also includes, some covers stuff. I just went down and counted the full lengths. And here we are with number 17, Diabolical. The first album, most notably, to not have Mike Siffringer on guitar, which I don't know how you guys are going to process that, but kind of a huge deal. A guy that's been with the band since 1982. The only remaining member other than Schmier being in the band. So it's basically the Schmier and Young Guys quartet now. Let's talk about first thoughts. Let's start with you, Alan. We'll change up the rotation today. Alan, what was your first impression of Diabolical?
First impression was pretty good. It's it's a Destruction record, and it fits old. They definitely have a template that they like over time. And I do want to preface everything tonight by saying I'm not very familiar with their output from the past decade or so. I know the classic albums, of course, and I have heard a few here and there since Schmier came back into the band. I've tried this week to listen to one or two of them just to get a little more context for this album. And yeah, I mean, it seems from what I've heard and what I've read of albums for a while now that they've got a template. They know how to put their albums together, and there's some variations here and there, but they're not trying to reinvent the wheel or anything. They're going to play thrash metal Destruction style, and this one will follow suit. It's maybe has a little bit more of a throwback sound to earlier days, but it's not straying in leaps and bounds into any new territory. So on first impression, I'm just like, yep, that's another good Destruction record. Let's play it some more and see what we can find out about it. But that was my kind of first take on the album. Jim, what did you think of it on first blush?
I thought
First
it was,
flush.
or I think it was. I guess we'll talk in present tense. It is a very solid thrash album. no real hiccups for me front and back except for one, and we'll talk about that later. But the risks are there. I do think I think what their tour manager is now the main guitar player. That guy is actually a really good guitar player, and I think that he kind of solo wise at least steps into Mike's shoes pretty well. And one of the things I think we're going to get into today is, it's a great thrash record, but is it a great destruction record? And that's something that thought kept recurring to me in my mind while listening to it. And can we separate the two? Should we separate the two? That's something I would like to get into yours and Marty's heads tonight. Like that's kind of the recurring thing for me on it. But anyway, just sticking with first impressions alone, it's a solid album. It's musically great, and I like Schmear's screams.
Yeah. He kicks it off with a really good one right there at the beginning of the album.
He does, yeah.
All right. Well, for me, first impression, solid thrash, modern sounding thrash album. Other than a couple songs here and there, doesn't really sound like Destruction to me. Just doesn't. It sounds, I guess, like modern Destruction. I mean, just this album, when Schmear got back in the band, was 2000s All Hell Breaks Loose. I saw them on this tour. This is a great album. There's a couple duds of songs here and there, but this to me sounds like Destruction. It sounds like, they shook off, Schmear not being in the band anymore, that least successful Human Cannonball piece of garbage, flushed and forgotten. They got the band back together. It's Mike, Schmear, and I can't remember what the drummer's name was on this. The lead off track, The Final Curtain, absolutely great. Could stand up with classic Destruction. It sounds like Destruction. As they went on from here, I think the album after this was the Antichrist. I mean, there's still some good Destruction type stuff on here. Even last year, 2019's Born to Perish, the last album with Mike on guitar. It sounds like modern Destruction, which is in a lot of ways gotten more brutal, more modern sounding. You listen to the guitar work, it sounds like Mike. It still has it's still clinging to a Destruction feel. On this album, you've got great players. The album sounds really good. It's a bit long, but we'll get into that later. But it just doesn't, other than Schmear singing on it, as the album goes, he is not doing as many of those high-pitched screams. He's just kind of doing more of a brutal type of style. It's like they've, embraced the modern side of Destruction and kind of pushed away the elements that made them Destruction. They made them unique. So, I mean, that was my first takeaway from it. And I guess we can kind of slide into this. Yesterday, Alan kind of made the comment, and I kind of want to roll with this. I mean, regardless of your thoughts on Diabolical, looking at any long-standing band, is it rare to find a new album that possesses the passion and power to win over your listening appreciation and actually steer you away from a band's classic era? What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, that's a big issue for me, at least, with some of these long-term big name bands. Again, the Destruction, there's a lot of gaps for me, so I do not have the full discography from recent years to work with. Part of the reason for that is when I hear more recent albums by a band like, say, This or Exodus or Creator, fill in the blank, often the end result ends up being that that's a good album. It's clearly not as good as, their classics. And as such, am I going to listen to it that much? Spoiler alert, my final, verdict on the Destruction album is, a thumbs up. I like it. I think it's actually quite good. But I don't know if I would buy it simply because it's the kind of album, I've done this for enough years to know when I'm walking into this trap. It's the kind of album I'll buy. I'll play it a bunch of times, but once it gets on that shelf, it never comes back off the shelf, because if I want to hear a Destruction album, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to pick one of the first 3 or 4. And if I have all these other Destruction albums that are good, but not great, what are the odds, I'm going to pick this one? It's just hardly ever going to get any plays after, that sort of, initial romance period. Once the honeymoon's over, it sits there and collects dust. And that's not to say the band shouldn't make these albums. They can obviously do what they want. It works well for them, of course. And it's not saying that it's a bad album in any way at all. It's just that, some of these bands get into a pattern of just making consistently good records, but they never seem to, like you kind of said, Maury, they can never quite recapture what they did 40 years ago. And that's perfectly understandable. It's 40 years later. 40 years ago, these guys were pissed off teens, Now they're angry old men yelling at clouds, much like we are. You've got 40 years of experience and touring. Your whole worldview and perception of everything is different. Yeah, and that said, I think Destruction does a decent job on this album of recapturing a good chunk of that piss and vinegar. Again, based on the few albums I know from their more recent catalog, they've held on to it a lot better than a lot of bands do. But it's still very hard for a new album to ever measure up. It's not going to have the same impact on us old fogies 99% of the time. Every now and then maybe one clicks. But for older fans, it just can't wow you the same way it did the first time you heard one of their classics, whether it's Bestial Invasion or whatever, when you were a teenager hanging out with your friends and discovering all this stuff. So you end up with a lot of good albums by a lot of good bands, but for me, those albums just don't come back into rotation very, very often. They just get drowned out by the classics. So that's kind of my take on it. Jim, what do you think about this?
It's something that I've kind of struggled with ever since I read this article, and this is years ago, so I'd have to look it up to share with everybody, but where someone did some kind of scientific study and basically discovered that, just generally speaking, everyone's musical taste always gravitates around their 16 to 19 age range, and the albums that meant a lot to them during that period, like sort of overwhelm anything that they listen to afterwards in terms of like importance or love, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I definitely came away with the same feeling. Like I think this is a great thrash album. I actually think and I'm going to go against the grain and say I like the one that preceded it better.
I did a little bit as well. I spent a little more time with that one. Yeah, Born to Perish.
Yeah, I think Born to Perish was just a little more angrier, darker to me. Where there was a little bit of and not a bad thing, especially when you're 40 years in. There's a little bit of playfulness to Diabolical, which maybe Schmear needed that now that Mike was gone to kind of throw in a little bit of that, and cue the GBH cover, or was it DVC? I can't remember.
It's GBH.
Yeah.
They also it's not their first time. They covered the Exploited's "Fuck the USA" on the Antichrist album, so obviously Schmear likes UK '82 punk, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, their clever thing goes way back. I mean, because Mad Butcher's got a Plasmatics cover on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm listening to it, and I kind of felt the same way as Alan. I'm like, this is great, but now I just want to listen to Release from Agony over and over again. You know what I mean? Which was my introduction into Destruction, and during that same period. So then I'm like, I had to step back and say, all right, am I playing to some kind of biochemical thing here that predisposes me to albums I discovered during that era, or is it truly that these albums do like smoke everything that's after? I'm going to be here a non-cynic and say that I really do think they smoke everything that comes after, and that it's not just my predisposition. Though I do think that there is some of that, kind of like confirmation bias of our youth that goes along with it. But one of the things that sort of gives me a little bit of a backup to my belief is that it isn't all the fact that I discovered this early. That it is in fact that there is a superiority of it. Is the fact. Most of the people, like Philicon Metal Archives, or just talk to like a younger metalhead. They're like I always think of Tanner. Well, the demos were better. With every band, it's always the demos were better. You know what I mean? And to some extent, not just the younger metal guys that are deep on the ground, but us too, the older guys will say, well, those first few albums are better. So I think that we do have a tendency to like bands when they're, to Alan's point, angrier, younger, like the rage they feel at the, society around them is definitely more, genuine, because they're coming out of that naivety of youth and realizing, oh wait, you guys are all lying to me, the world is shit. You know what I mean? And it's only after a time that you start, when you get older, you're like, you have a little bit more of appreciation, even though things suck. You're like, well, hey, I got it pretty good. You know what I mean? And that can kind of like, weaken the impact of the music, I will say that I admire Destruction sticking to thrash. I admire Destruction sticking to the same kind of lyrical concepts and finding new ways to kind of play with those that kind of sound funny. Like, again, there's a playfulness with Diabolical lyrics on this album, and maybe it's just how it struck me, but yeah, I'm still kind of struggling with it. A great album, but is it a great Destruction album? I think that rawness, that the edginess there, that because you listen to Sentence to Death or whatever. I mean, it's a hard listen. I mean, it's rough on the ears. That first wave of black metal stuff, early Sodom and all that kind of stuff. It's brutal on the ears. Where I feel like this latter era stuff is easier on the ears, and that's kind of cool. You know what I mean? But does it equate it in terms of emotional impact? Probably not for me. So you take that for what you will.
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100% with both you guys. I mean, I look at the early, especially the first two Destruction albums. I mean, I listen to the wild, free spirit of riffs like Bestial Invasion. I mean, the riffs are crazy but catchy, and Infernal Overkill. I mean, it's just such an evil, dark record. So good. And Eternal Devastation, super technical but catchy. The biggest deterrent on that record is the way it almost sounds like the guitars are distorted but not distorted. It's just a weird, it's like they recorded it on tinfoil. I don't remember who said that in the comments, but that sounds like they recorded it on tinfoil is what the guitars sound like. We're younger, and these youthful thrash records just had so much fire and passion to them, and these bands are starting off young and pissed off, and just coming at you with everything they got. And as the years go on, I mean, when this happens, get the band back together, it's all of a sudden a business. This is a career path. I mean, it was leading up to this, but I mean, the band had put out a hell of a lot more albums after this than they did before this. So, I mean, this is where, Destruction were back, and they're on the festival circuits in Europe. They're playing the US, they're touring the world. This isn't a part-time funsy thing as it might've been when you were a kid. This is a serious job. So you got to keep that machine going, and you're not going to have, you might be writing from a different perspective, but I mean, I see Destruction as a very similar trajectory as Creator. Very influential, one of the big four of German thrash. Their middle era, they get weird, they struggle, they come back with some old members, and they, Creator. We were talking in the dugout beforehand. Out of all the new thrash records that came out, there's Sodom, Destruction, and Creator. It seems like people are shitting on the Creator the most. Which I don't hate that record. I don't think it's amazing, but they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're, appealing to the European, festival crowds. It's all kind of shouty, chanty, chanting along, pump your fist, drink beer, thrash metal. And I agree with Jim. The new Destruction, it's kind of to be applauded that these guys are still kind of kicking ass after all these years. But like Alan said, if I had this record when I was done, I slipped it in, I filed it into the collection. It's guaranteed to probably not come out again for a long time. There's just, Release from Agony, Eternal Devastation, Infernal Overkill, Mad Butcher, Sentence of Death. Those are the ones. I even like Cracked Brain. I have that on tape. It's got the guy from, was it Pyogenesis? No. No, I can't remember the name of the band that the guy's singing. Doesn't bother me. It's a pretty decent album. It's just hard to out of all the modern stuff, this is the one I keep going back to. I just listened to this probably a couple weeks ago. It's a fun, good album. The production's kind of sucks, but the songs have that excited, free, young spirit about them that made Destruction so good. For me, Destruction, the heart and soul of it, yeah, Schmear's vocals, but it's Mike, his riff writing style. Poltergeist, thank you, Deadly Rassic. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, the vocalist from Poltergeist sang on Crack Brain. Schmear is, obviously the voice of Destruction, but the music is the heart of it. And Mike's gone. The guys that are in the band now, they do a great job. It sounds fantastic. It's a good modern thrash album, but it kind of lost all the Destruction character to me. And let's talk about this. This is the first Destruction album not to feature the unique guitar stylings of Mike. Schmear is the only remaining original member. Is it technically even fair to call this band Destruction anymore? Is that even a concern? What do you think, Alan?
I don't think it's a concern. I mean, that kind of thing comes up often after there's been a few lineup changes. Schmear is still there with, his characteristic sound. The band didn't go off in a completely new metal direction or shoegaze or anything like that. It's still, very aggressive thrash. It's still got the little bit of the snotty attitude. It's still got the kind of, quick little, 2-beat, pattern to a lot of it. No, I've got no problem with it being called Destruction. That's I don't think that's would be a concern at all. Understand, especially for people really invested in the band, losing Mike is, a big part of the change. But like Jim mentioned earlier, the new guy is quite good. And while, it is different, he's obviously not going to play exactly the same as Mike did. I've played, like I said, the album or two before this some, and he's very good at fitting into the Destruction mold they had on those albums. No, there's not all the the interesting little bits that Mike would add here and there necessarily, but for me it still feels like a pretty solid Destruction album. I think to me it feels closer to Destruction maybe than it's feeling for you, Marty. So no, I certainly would have no problem with this being released under the Destruction banner whatsoever.
Jim?
I probably would have had a little bit of trouble with it if Mike hadn't have left of his own volition, just because he kind of seemed like, from what he said anyway, he just wasn't feeling it anymore or some weirdness like that. But he didn't seem to, I always feel like if there's only like a couple members left and then one of those couple members leaves and there's only one left in there, they're bickering about who should have the name. That's when I start feeling weird about, like, should this even go on at all? Should they both just start something new? That kind of a thing. But it seems like Mike left. And I don't know that he gave Schmear his blessing, but he certainly, at least I didn't have read anything where he was like shitting on them continuing. You know what I mean? So I think because, if anyone had a right to have an issue with that, it would be Mike, and he doesn't. I think it's okay that these guys, the Schmear's continuing on, with a new lineup. But, what we can't forget is that does affect the sound, and it kind of makes you wonder, like, where's it going to go from here with only Schmear on bass and vocals, on guitar playing. It's like a good example of something that was able to continue on. It's like I like that last Possessed record. You know what I mean? Even though
I did too. It grew on me. I didn't at first, but I ended up really liking it.
Yeah. Those guys were somehow able to really get their mindsets into like a Larry Lalonde riff writing early 80s. And kind of pulled off like it sounded like Possessed to me. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, the way the riffs were written, was set, the attempt was there to keep it within that vein, and they succeeded. But I guess time will tell. If like Furia, basically, I guess he's most like a producer, and he worked with Nervoso and stuff like that. If Furia is going to be able, or even wants to follow in Mike's shoes, you know what I mean? He did it enough on this album to retain Destruction sound, even though I think it's like not quite as aggressive, a little bit, I don't want to say happier, but not quite as like, angry. But I wonder how it's going to go from here on out. How much influence on the riff writing does Schmear have, and will he have, and will Furia's own personal style, go a different direction. So I don't know where it's going to go from here. Having thought about that, thinking about Possessed, it can go the right direction. For now, I think it shows promise, but yeah, I no problems at all for me for continuing on as Destruction. If I were Schmear, I would have done the same thing, because to Marty's point earlier, this isn't a joke with them. This isn't a side thing. These guys don't have, these guys tour. This isn't a day job. This is all Schmear's got. So hey, he's got to keep on rolling. So.
Yep, and I agree. I mean, it was a question I felt needed. It was worth asking because, I mean, I know after Hanneman died, people were saying, Slayer should end, Slayer should end, Slayer should end. But I mean, what are they going to do after an entire? I mean, these guys have been doing it since '82, 39. They've been in Destruction longer than they've been out of Destruction.
Yep.
And to lose your second, yet two original members left, one leaves. I mean, what's that other guy going to do? Start a new band? I mean, it's not going to be the same. It's just not going to be the same. You gotta go with the machine. You have to roll with the direction the machine is going. And it, I've watched some modern, some recent shows this year on big festivals, and the band sounds fine. They sound good. They're, as long as Schmear is still the voice of it, that's great. From a guitar perspective, I know I can notice the changes, but it's not enough to make them. It's not like Alan said. It's not a big direction change. It's not anything weird like that. So yeah,
nothing's been derailed really.
Nothing is off the rails at all, for sure. But let's discuss the musicality and composition of Diabolical. Alan.
I think everyone sounds pretty good on here. Again, they obviously had, an issue there with trying to replace, a longtime guitarist. And then we've covered it pretty well, but I think they did pretty well at it. No one's going to sound exactly like Mike, but they got somebody to slot in that does a pretty good job. The duo they've got there, give it some really nice guitar work throughout the album. The album, Schmear sounds good. It's got, the kind of, new production values. So like you said earlier, Marty, it sounds kind of like a modern thrash record. It feels also, in a lot of ways that they're trying to do sort of a throwback record in some ways. But, that also trickles over into things like, the lyrics and the art. It's overall a fairly aggressive album. Yeah, it may not be quite as aggressive, or not as aggressive in the same ways as things like, I keep forgetting the name of the previous album, Born to Perish.
Born to Perish.
Yeah. But it's still a very fast-paced album for the most part. You have lots, especially, it opens up really quick, with two where they're really putting the pedal down. They do a good job of pacing it though. They do mix in a few songs where they go back maybe to more of a mid-paced beat, but it's still heavy so that it doesn't become just one big speedy blur. So I like the fact that they changed up, the pacing a little bit from track to track. There's one or two parts here and there that are kind of, that stand out as a little different. I'm sure we'll end up talking about those maybe as we get to, favorite or least favorite parts. There's, of course, the cover song that wraps it up at the end, and it's actually a very cool take on the GBH classic. They do it justice while also kind of, thrashifying it, to a good deal. It actually worked very, very well. It's the kind of thing that a lot of times you'd think of as a throw, those last minute cover songs at the end of the disc is like, whatever. This one I really like, this one I feel like, no, it fits on the album quite well. So no, I think in terms of performance and sound, everything here is working pretty good. If there are issues with the album, it's not due to those things.
Okay. Jim.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely no taking away from the musicality. Randy Black is a fantastic drummer. Someone mentioned it in the comments, and I completely agree. He's a great addition to the band, and definitely brings some serious chops to the percussion on the albums he's been on. And Demir, I guess he's only been around for a few years now, but he's awesome too. He's a great musician. I mean, anybody that studies under a corner's guitar player is fine by me. So yeah, that's his history. So yeah, musicality, these guys are on point. I think Schmear's bass, at least on the stereos and headphones I listen to, I think it could have been louder in the mix. I would have liked to hear the bass more. you know, his vocals, his screams are awesome, and you know, some of the, like, horrification. What a song title! I mean, I don't know what that means, but I think it's awesome. And you know, the I guess, yeah, a little bit of that sort of like razor blade edge of Schmear's vocals isn't quite there, and I think that's just part of age. It's kind of hard to get that just like throat shredding kind of like edge to your vocals as you get older. You know, a lot of us, our voices get a little deeper, a little more rounded off. You know what I mean? So, you know, jumping back and forth from this album to the old stuff, like I was doing, you can definitely, it's very obvious that sort of kind of throat shred isn't there anymore. But he delivers his you know, destruction, you know, poetry, if you will, you know, with such like you know, vigor. You know, I mean, like, it doesn't seem to matter. You know, it didn't bother me. I think it fits in the context of like the modern production of the sound. You know, I mean, so it all sort of makes sense. So yeah, definitely from a musical and production sound or production standpoint, it sounds great. But you know, again, just, you know, coming at them from those early years, like, you know, something always gets a little lost to me when the modern production comes in. I don't fault musicians for wanting to, like, you know, the things that we love about those old sounds, to them we're like, this is the best we could do with the finances we had at the time. This was the best we could do with the experience we had at the time. But you know, the reality is and I think every metalhead struggles with this. It's like, you know, growth, you know, grabbing technology, learning new things, employing those things, but also like, you know, working with what little you had and making something awesome out of it. You know, I'm always going to gravitate towards the latter, though I can't discount on an individual musician level the tendency to embrace the new and the other. You know what I mean? So I get where they're going, and it's cool. And I think everything's fine within the context of the album. But you know, I've noticed we keep saying that word, though. You're saying it, Marty, and I'm saying it. That we keep saying it's fine. It's fine. Maybe it's not fine, though. You know what I mean, we can, you know, or maybe fine isn't good enough. You know, I'm starting to question myself as I hear that word come out. You know, so.
Yeah. Yep. And you know, I can't slam on the music on this album. It's really quite good. And like I said, it doesn't really, the album starts off for me really strong, with the title track and No Faith in Humanity sounding the most like Destruction to me. And as the album goes on, it starts to just kind of embrace this modern feel, and like songs like Repent Your Sins and Tormented Soul. Both of those songs, I was kind of surprised. They start off sounding like a modern Carcass song. The way the guitar tone is, the tuning, the style, the bluesy kind of slide in the riffs, it sounded like Carcass to me. And you know, if I want Carcass, I'll listen to Carcass. I don't want to listen to Destruction to hear Carcass. And that's just where this whole modern thing enters in. And you know, like, it's fine. As Jim was saying, you know, it's fine. It's good. It's talented. And I like, you know, where they went with it. They, you know, they didn't wimp out on this record. They didn't, you know, they didn't really sacrifice any sort of, you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say. They didn't opt for, you know, what's popular. They're still trying to be a modern thrash band with a good, solid production, and they achieved it. And it's kind of hard for me to sit and shit on something that's really obviously good. I do think the album gets a little long-winded. Actually, by the time Tormented Soul hits, let's see, there's 13 songs on here with an intro and the GBH cover. Could have been 8 or 9. And I think those others, you know, you get around Horrification and Ghost from the Past. Those could have been B-sides to a single. You know, it could have been, you know, an EP, working towards an EP. Did everything that was written during this time need to go on this record? You know, I don't know. Bands are still writing albums for the CD format, even though vinyl's what's popular. But getting back, I've kind of fell off track here. But the you know, the musicality of this album is fantastic. It's great. It's modern Destruction. I don't think it is as They've kind of lost their identity a little bit. And Schmear, I mean, even though he's screaming in the high register on occasion, is kind of a nod and a throwback to these youthful days. I mean, he spends a lot of time in a more mid-range to even some growls, and that's something he's been doing since he's come back in the band. It's just, like Jim said, age, changes your voice a little bit. You're not going to be able to live in that high register all the time and be able to tour successfully without fucking up your voice. But the songwriting here is solid. I have no real complaints other than length of some of the songs and kind of loss of the Destruction muse a little bit. But yeah, production we've all kind of discussed. Unless Alan, you have something to talk about the production. Do you have anything to say about that? Or
one thing, it's a little interesting because while on one hand, the feel that they're trying to do, again, a little bit of sort of a return to the old school 80s thrash kind of album. The production, of course, is nothing like that at all. The production wise, it feels much more like a new thrash album. And it's also at odds a little bit with Destruction because what they're playing here doesn't sound like Destruction sounded in the late 80s. Like you and other folks have been saying in the chat, Destruction had that much looser sound, on their, early classic albums for a while.
Yeah.
And this album is much tighter, much more compact than that. So while this does kind of sound like an old school thrash album, it does not sound really like an old school Destruction album due to the production and the way that the songwriting's changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some kind of a few things pulling in different directions there.
Well, while you're up, why don't you talk about your favorite and least favorite songs?
All right, give me 1 second. I'm typing a comment for Philip here. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Jim, why don't you go with your favorite and least favorite songs while Alan is addressing the crowd there?
Sure. It's funny, Marty, you mentioned, repent your sins and how you were kind of like, I hear some like Carcass there. Well, maybe that's why it's one of the ones I like the most.
Right.
I really like Repent Your Sins. It's second to the title track though. I think Diabolical is a super strong
Good song.
start to the album. I love that main riff. It's based off of a alternate picked, like 7 notes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but fast, like over and over. And then they do variations of that same riff, like all throughout the song. And so they, it isn't like they're playing that exact riff over and over again. They'll add a little scale into it. They'll play it in a different key. They keep behind the leads and stuff, and so they keep coming back to that pattern through Diabolical, and it makes it super interesting. Because you don't know, they're going to return to that rhythm or beat, if you will, or whatever, but they do it with a little spice each time. So that with Schmear's screams and just the chorus is fist pumping. I really thought it was a great intro to the song. But yeah, Repent Your Sins. Some cool, I'm always a fan of triplet style riffs, and there's cool triplet style riffs going on there. And to Marty's point, maybe a little bit of Carcass, but hey, I dug it. But, it makes me think what Alan just said, though. This is good thrash, but if we're doing some kind of cool Carcassy type thing, is it Destruction? I don't know. I don't know. A couple of other things, that, like Marty was saying, though, I do feel, I do wish they would kind of get out of the songs a little bit. Some of them are a little too long, but Destruction's got kind of a history of that. Some of their stuff on Release of Agony, my favorite album of theirs, like you're kind of like, okay, you guys can stop now. The riffs go on a little too long, and that's just kind of part of who they are. But I would definitely think it's they could shorten it up a little bit here and there. The dual lead attack back and forth isn't super necessary. Given the history of the band, I think anyway. My least favorite, Alan, I know you like it, but for me it's the cover, man. I don't like covers in general, unless they're really, 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 really good, and not that this one is bad, but it just felt like when I was listening to the album, I was kind of like, what's going on? Like, what happened here? Like, it kind of threw me off a little bit. But the good thing about the cover's placement, which as the last song, was I did feel that the album, even though I think it's solid overall, it does start to kind of like get a little, I don't know. The excitement seems to wane a little bit on the last few songs. Like it isn't as interesting. Like I feel like it's definitely, this is a record that's front loaded with songs like Diabolical and The Last of a Dying Breed, I think is a really good one. And so, but after you start getting past that sixth track, it kind of started, I start kind of drifting off a little bit. And so the one good thing about the cover, even though I'm not a fan of it, was it woke me back up, and I started the record over again to re-listen to it. So I do think that it was good for a jolt of energy, but just not. Even though they have a history of covering punk, it just wasn't my favorite. But
okay, Alan.
Okay, yeah, I'm up here. Yeah, sorry, we're just people are discussing multiple different bands named Kraken in the chat, so we're trying to sort out bands from 3 different continents, or roughly at this point, having fun with that. I think the album's relatively consistent throughout. Looking at the track list here, it starts with a really good 1-2 punch. Diabolical rolls right into No Faith in Humanity. They're really thrashing it up nicely. Repent Your Sins, again, kind of goes for that more mid-pace thing, but that does help, break up the tempo a little bit. I like it when bands, do a little bit of variation there. Hope Dies Last is cool, gets it sped back up. Let's see. I really like Last of a Dying Breed. It's got a good sing-along kind of chorus hook to it. Let's see. State of Apathy is a really good one. Someone else was in the chat, just mentioned it was one of their favorites. That one's interesting because it's got that very weird kind of more melodic guitar solo thing going on in the bridge where it sounds very, very different. And sometimes when I've played it, it's like, oh, I like that. That's cool because it stands out. And other times when I've played that song, it's like, that kind of sounds out of place. I'm not sure. It's very odd. It really is different from anything else on the album. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that one. What else have we got here? Yeah, there's a couple towards the end that I'm not quite as big on, like Jim was saying. I do like the Horrification track. Yeah, crazy title. And it's kind of fun. It's a song actually really shitting on, Instagram influencers, and this whole generation of, just sell yourself out for a couple of quick bucks on TikTok, or your little 15 minutes of fame, and why don't you try to have some integrity instead? So I like the message, and obviously they got an eye-catching title for it. But I think for favorite, I will actually pick Ghost from the Past. It's another very strong song like the others. It's kind of a fun one. It's about exes, significant others. And if nothing else, I absolutely love the line in it. I've got the lyrics pulled up here somewhere to make sure I get it right. But yeah, when I heard this, I just, could not stop laughing in a good way at it. But yeah, it's got the lines, again, singing about, when old girlfriends or whatever pop back up, and it's just like, oh shit, I don't want to deal with this person again. But the line is, devious creature, ruthless and cunning. Her weapons are evil, gorgeous, and stunning. And that just I love that fucking line. That's just fun. Like kind of like Jim, you've mentioned a couple times. There's some fun to be had, in the album with things like that.
There is. There's just a little bit of a light. I don't want lighthearted. Doesn't sound right. A little bit just like a happier vibe going on, which sounds weird talking about destruction, but it didn't bother me. It doesn't bother me.
It's a happier vibe, but I mean, it is also, from that kind of, cynical, kind of, punky, snotty, perspective at the same time. It's not like with a hell of a lot of snark behind it. It's got it's got the snarky cynicism that makes it work for destruction. That it's not just like a lame dad joke kind of thing. So yeah, I'm going to pick Ghost from the Past as my favorite. That line alone gets it the extra point. If I had to pick a least favorite, I might go with Servant of the Beast. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't feel like it doesn't quite have the slow grind of some of the mid-pace songs, but it's not as frantic or aggressive as some of the other songs. So it kind of falls through the cracks a little bit there. But yeah, I'll pick those for favorite and least favorite. So Marty, what are yours?
Let me pull up the track list here real quick. My favorites were. Let me get me up here. Diabolical title track, great opening track for the album. A lot of fire to it. No Faith in Humanity, good, like Alan said, one good 1-2 punch. Makes you think, okay, this is a solid Destruction album. But like I said, as it goes, it starts to kind of lose lose their character a little bit, which it's really okay. I mean, it's a good solid modern thrash record. Repent Your Sins, I was kind of ambivalent. Tormented Soul, like I said, I heard Carcass. I felt it was a little distracting, a little slow, kind of bluesier riffs. Horrification didn't do a whole lot for me. And the cover, like I said, obviously Shamir's a punk fan. They did on the Antichrist, they did Fuck the USA by the Exploited, and Jim mentioned, or Mad Butcher, they did Reject Emotions by the Plasmatics. So obviously punk is a part of the Destruction aesthetic, and punk is part of thrash. I mean, that is a very integral part of thrash music, is punk and hardcore. The Lonely Wolf, like I said, the last 3 or 4 songs on the album, I could have take them or leave them. It kind of ran out of gas a bit for me, but I mean, it still wasn't bad enough to make me want to turn it off, or, oh, I wish this was over. I just started to notice, things are starting to drag on a bit. And again, I've only spun this about 3 times. So, I mean, I haven't really invested the time, but, let's end with Judgment final thoughts. Alan.
One thing, but I guess before we jump to that, because you've both mentioned it, and I know we've mentioned it with other albums that we've talked about on other Wednesday nights, is that a lot of times we feel like these albums run out of gas towards the end, and that, there are a few songs, is that a result of them being a few songs too long, that we're just worn out and not paying as much attention at the end?
Probably.
Or is it just the sequencing of the album that somehow, the less interesting tracks really are migrating towards the end of these albums? I don't know. It's hard, to say for me personally, because these albums, after, you get to that 50-minute mark, and your mind is, at least for me, my mind is kind of wandering around to other stuff, and I'm not paying as much attention. Sometimes I need to go back and play just those last few songs a few times to pick things up. So what do you all think about that? Are these albums just, a little too long for their own good? Do they really have the bad songs at the end of the album? Is it on purpose? What's going on with that?
Go ahead, Jim.
Type in a comment. Slow to return. So final judgments, right? Okay.
No, did you hear any of the stuff that Alan was talking about?
I was typing a message to Alan.
I'm typing a reply to you right now.
I'll jump in on it then, Alan.
Sure.
It's a good point. Does the album run out of gas at the end, or is it that's running out of gas? It's easy for me to say it's the album running out of gas, because I can't be running out of gas, right? But it might very well be the listener. A 50-minute album is a lot to take, unless you're really absorbed in it and you really, really love it. I mean, you look at Rain and Blood. That's 27 minutes long. I can listen to that thing 4 times in a row, because it's so fierce from start to finish. It gets in, it gets out. It's kicking your ass the whole time. This album is paced very sensibly. There's no problems with it there. But still, it feels too long to me, and it might be just because I run out of gas on it. I don't. I think the more interesting riffs are stacked at the beginning of the album. As the album goes on, the riffs kind of bleed together a bit for me. But again, is that the band's fault, or is that my fault? That's a good one to ponder. And it may not be until I sit with this a few more times. I don't know. What do you think, Jim, about the whole length of the album? Is it
I actually kind of feel the same way as you, Marty. I do feel like, again, some of the songs were too long. Though I do feel in Destruction's history, I do feel like some of their songs have been too long. Like, I'm ready for the next one. That's good. I've heard that riffing up times now. You can move on. So that isn't a sort of a new thing for Destruction for me. But I do think when you combine that with multiple tracks, then that sort of feeling where I felt like the end of the album was kind of falling off for me a little bit, losing some of its excitement for me. I think you when you combine that with the long songs, then it gets a little cumbersome. Not enough to derail this album, because I think it's still solid thrash. But I feel with, like, you mentioned Rambo, it's a great example. If this thing had been shortened and the songs were more to the point and fewer tracks, and I think that it would have been more of a statement, coming from Schmier saying, "Hey man, I'm a metal punk. This is a metal punk record. I still got that. I'll use Alan's term from earlier, piss and vinegar in me." I think it would have been a great statement for him to kind of structure the album that way, to kind of sort of alleviate any fears, which I think we're kind of discussing now, sort of indirectly, that Destruction is morphing into something else. I think if he had went that tack, you know what I mean? It kind of, even though Destruction has had long songs in the past, but like went from a track of like, this is, my punk attitude of, I'm not giving you up, I'm still DIY, we're doing this, shorter songs, more aggressive, to the point, would have, that, how I was telling you, I'm wondering where Destruction is going to go now. If he had made an album that was shorter, more direct and in your face, I think that I wouldn't have that question. I would feel at ease with where Destruction's heading now,
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of with you there.
But Alan, you're completely right. I mean, a lot of these Wednesday nights, this isn't the first time we said, the album could have been 3-4 songs shorter. I mean, it's kind of, and I think part of that, vinyl kind of died out for a while, and the CD medium, it holds almost 80 minutes of information on it. And I think a lot of bands just started, they got trained to start writing for CDs. They start writing longer albums. It wasn't just metal bands. A lot of artists do this. It's just kind of the thing. And now that vinyl is a thing, these long albums it's 2 LP sets. I mean, everything has to go on 2 LP sets, which, unless you really love vinyl, I mean, that's a lot of getting up and screwing around, flipping records and changing records. And maybe if they want the vinyl thing to work and be a little bit more impact, shave some of these songs off, take a little more self-editing, say, okay, all these songs are good, none of these are crap songs, but which ones are better than the others, and then shave off the ones that maybe aren't as good as the first half of the album and put them on an EP. I mean, there's other things you can do to maximize your impact. And those 3-4 songs you shaved off the end of your album that are good, they might be great on an EP. But a person could go buy the EP and like, wow, this is a really good, you're hearing them with fresh ears. You're processing 4 songs independently of, the other material it was written with. I just think from a marketing perspective, that just makes a lot more sense in this day and age, to try to stretch out, just because I wrote 14 songs doesn't mean we need to use all 14 songs. That's just my opinion on that.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree in a lot of cases. Yep.
All right. Judgment. Final thoughts, Alan.
Oh, okay. Final thoughts. I do like the album. Yeah, and again, I'm not as necessarily thrown by the departure of Mike, as you might be, Marty. But again, I haven't kept up with the band as closely in the past decade or so. So I'm I'm not feeling the loss as much. There obviously is a difference. I have liked again, working backwards to some of the other albums. I've enjoyed what I've heard. So yeah, I give this album, it's a solid thumbs up. If you want to grade or whatever, I'm like 7.5, 8. It's kind of a letter grade of a B kind of thing. So yeah, overall positive album. I dig it. But as I said before, if you ask me, are you going to go buy it? I'm like, I really don't know, because I don't know if this is the kind of album that will get a lot of repeat listens. If I find it, for like $9 or something, and yeah, sure, I'll probably, it's one of those, if I pick it up cheap, great, but am I going to go out and buy it, when it's, on the new shelf at the local store? I kind of doubt it. I will probably take a pass on it just because I don't foresee it getting enough plays. And I want to make one last comment about it. Some folks have mentioned it in the chat. Some folks have liked the cover art. Some folks have not liked the cover art. It's, again, obviously really dialing up the 80s thrash nostalgia a bit, which I have no problem with that. The thing that I don't like about the cover, though, is the color scheme. I have never liked gray on that reddish orange. I just don't like those colors together. Classic example, the Chasms second album with the gray. It's the same color scheme. There's something that's just very jarring about those colors being together that bugs me. It's like half the picture is black and white and half the picture's in color, and it just makes the image look wrong somehow, like they didn't completely finish processing it, or they tried stapling together two different pictures. And so yeah, I got to give the cover a thumbs down, not because of the imagery, but just because of the color scheme. I never liked that particular color combination.
It's very much a Repka tribute, with the predominant character on the front and then the crap in the back is being secondary.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's got every late 80s thrash cliche: nuclear waste, zombies, knives, horns being thrown up, a hand ripped off. It's not missing much of anything. Which, again, I've got no problem with the content, but I really wish they hadn't colored the zombie in that just dead flat gray color. It just doesn't work for me, but that's just me. What's
Aaron says, funny to hear Alan talking about the orange cover with his Clemson shirt on.
Yeah, but I don't have a gray mask and skin. If I did, I'd be wearing a purple Clemson shirt or something, or a Furman shirt or a USC shirt, or so who knows what. But so yeah, I like it. I think it's a good album. I think they delivered nicely, but I don't see myself buying it because I think it will get lost amongst the Destruction catalog, much less the greater thrash catalog. I don't know if it's going to hold up over time. I don't think it's good enough to get a lot of attention and repeat visits.
What about you, Jim?
I feel the same way as Alan. I think that this is a very solid thrash album. Not so sure it's a continuation. It's not a continuation of early Destruction. It's a continuation of modern Destruction. So I would say if you're a fan of modern era Destruction 2000s onward,
you're gonna love it.
Napalm, you're gonna love it. It's great. It's a great follow up to the 2019 one, which I keep forgetting the name of it, man.
Born to Perish.
Born to Perish. Yeah. Okay.
I keep forgetting it too for some reason.
Yeah.
But it's a good album.
But it is a good album, and the musicians are top notch on it. Again, the drummer's great. Raining Black and Furious Edition. A guy who knows them very well. He was our tour manager. I think he's worked with Nervoso on albums. He knows thrash. It works, but for me, if it had been more of like that kind of restatement of Destruction that I was talking about earlier, where simpler, shorter, more angrier, saying, hey, this is where we're headed. More like, the early days, then I would have picked it up. But as it stands, as more of a latter era album for me. To me, it's a used bin kind of thing. Yeah, if I saw the CD for $6 at my local record shop, I pick it up. But I'm probably not going to grab the new one. Though I'm grateful, again, as I've said before, to this show that by highlighting these new albums from old bands, I'll revisit records that I've listened to, like Infernal Overkill. I can't remember the last time I listened to that one.
I love it. It's so good.
And I was like, oh man, I'm so glad I'm listening to Infernal Overkill right now. Yeah. And so it's still great for me. It's still a win all the way around. But yeah. So depending on when you came into Destruction, is whether or not I'd recommend you pick it up or not. If you're into the modern stuff, go get it. If you're like, I kind of lost track after after 87, then I'd say, maybe hold off, give it some time.
All right. I have actually been keeping up pretty good with Destruction throughout these modern era. I've either people send them to me, send me a copy, or, the early, when they like this, I got as a promo. The album, the 3 albums after this, I got as promos. for writing for Maniacs and stuff, and I've been with them the whole time, and I've always given them a nod of appreciation. I look at a band like, okay, let's throw Corner under the bus here for a second. They're a band that among one of my favorite thrash bands. I mean, R.I.P., Punishment for Decadence, No More Color, even Mental Vortex are all exceptional, amazing European thrash records. Mental Vortex is kind of the sign of what's to come. They start to simplify their sound a little bit. They strip away the complex riffs. Still some there, but it's starting to be a little more catchy. And then Grin comes out, which is kind of groovy. And I know I see people show reissues of that album to this day and like talk favorably about it. I'm just like, how are they hearing the same album that I am? That is such a slap to the face of, their earlier works. You can't really say the same thing about, Destruction. Diabolical is not a slap to the face of their earlier works. It is an excellent, well considered and executed modern day thrash record. Is it as crazy and free spirited as the first 3 albums in particular? Maybe not, but they've already done that. What's in the past. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to hold them to the flame over that. Musicians are going to change. They're going to improve. They're going to, look at that early complex stuff and realize that it's kind of harder shit to play that stuff live. And if you're a live band playing out all the time, you don't want your set list every night to be fucking hard. You want to worry about putting on a good show and, playing some of the classics, working those in for sure. But, really giving it on the new stuff and, worrying about stage presence and all that stuff. So, I mean, I really can't blame Destruction where they ended up as far as stripping away a lot of the technical aspects of their riffage. Diabolical is a good record. Am I going to run out and buy it new? I'm not going to buy it new. I'm not going to get the vinyl. I don't need it. This is a record I don't need on vinyl. If it turns up used, I'll pick it up. I'll pick it up and I'll have it with the rest and it'll be fine. I'll spin it on occasion. I'm surprised. Darcy sent me the Born to Perish album and it's good, man. I've listened to it probably 5 or 6 times, but again, once it gets filed, it enters the void. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if it's going to come back out again, but yeah, I guess that's it. And before we close for the evening, it's Alan's turn to select our next hill to die upon.
Ooh, gumdrops. I get to pick. I mean, fuck yeah, horns up. My turn. Can we edit that out?
No.
Fuck. Okay. Yes, I've got something lined up to pick. I've been listening to a few things by this band, revisiting their catalog. And it turns out there was an album kind of smack dab in the middle of things that I've never heard and kind of forgot even got released. So rather than listen to it by myself, let's make everybody listen to it. We are going to do some Bay Area thrash with a Testament album from 2008 called The Formation of Damnation. I've never heard it. I think it's the second one after
it's a good album.
Came back into the band. But that's about all I know about it. So, yeah, I kind of want to check it out just because I know almost their whole discography, but I don't know this one at all. So, yeah.
If anything, I would say that album's kind of a throwback to their early days as far as feel of it. It's a good record. I don't own it, but I've had a tape dub of it or a CDR of it forever. I've listened to it a bit. It's good.
I have never heard a single note of it, but we'll change that within the next 7 days.
Awesome. And I know what Jim's next pick is too. He's already kind of we're gonna be the next few weeks will be pretty thrashy. It's pretty cool.
That's okay. That's okay.
Awesome.
Okay, in closing, again, there's some new people in the chat. Everybody, thank you so much for hanging out and contributing to the chat and our show. And
yeah,
thank
it's
you
cool
for
to see. Cool to see some new faces, first-time viewers, and first-time chatters in there. I hope you all have had fun and enjoyed it. And we have some show notes coming up that you may want to check out. Marty, can you run through those?
There's been a good handful of subscribers here the last week or two. It's very cool to see. Thank you so much. And we'll be here Friday with hopefully Melanie from Melanie Loves Death Metal. She's a little under the weather. Hopefully she'll be better by Friday. And Simon from Explosive Action will be doing a Keeper Reap the Extreme Metal edition. So that'll be fun. And next week we'll see. We've still got to get some things ironed out, but
yep, we're talking to some folks with some different options for next week. We'll see what comes together. It's this is the time of year where a lot of folks are doing vacation and travel and stuff, so it does get a little tricky lining folks up, but we'll have something fun here and there for sure. So everybody keep your eyes and ears open for announcements.
And everybody go subscribe to Let's Talk Metal's YouTube channel, Alan's channel. It's great. And go buy something from Eihwaz Recordings. The link is in the description. Jim has got some tapes he needs to move and some good stuff for as well.
Support dead formats.
Yeah, support dead formats. Yay. And we're going to end this with Tim's adaptation of our confused closing statements. That chicken tasted diabolical. Cheers, everyone. Have a good one. We'll